Good morning, and welcome to Comics for Breakfast. I'm your host, Jason MINK. Today, we're going to be going to the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics Archives. We're going to be pulling 3 books from the back issue bins. We're going to check them out and see just what it is that makes those 3 books special. But now, without further ado, it's breakfast time!
Breakfast!
All right. A traditional comic looks like this. Golden Age comics are a little bit bigger, and modern comics are a little bit smaller, but these are more or less the accepted dimensions of the comic book. However, for as long as there have been comics, publishers have experimented with the comic book format. They've made them bigger, they've made them smaller, they've changed the shape, they've made them edible. Just one time. If you can think of it, chances are that some desperate publisher has tried it. Now, today we're going to take a look at some of these unusual formats. We're going to start off with a tiny comic book. Look at this little guy. Shlomo Raven may be small in stature, but it's big where it counts, between the pages. Now, this book was published by Byron Preiss, who issued a number of fondly remembered publications in the 1970s. Heck, I remember them. Here are my copies. His fiction illustrated series of novels include Starfawn, illustrated by Stephen Fabian, Jim Steranko's Chandler, Red Tide, and 1977's Son of Sherlock Holmes, with art by Ralph Reese. But Shlomo Raven here was the first of the fiction illustrated books. Released in 1976, the stories within were written by Byron Preiss and illustrated by the great Tom Sutton. So what's it all about, Alfie? Well, let's get into it. Smarter than Marlowe, shorter than Spade. He's Shlomo Raven, public detective, starring in 2 atmospheric thrillers in the vein of The Maltese Falcon, only shot through with mad-style humor. In fact, the book is dedicated to Harvey Kurtzman, Bill Elder, Wally Wood, Jack Davis, John Severin, and Will Eisner, so you know exactly where it's all coming from. In The Fark's Job, we meet our hero in an appropriately noir manner, emerging from the anonymity of the rainy New York City night. Returning to his rundown office, Shlomo Raven, P.I., narrates one of the most incredible jobs of his career. It appears the legendary comedic team, the Farks brothers, have been abducted. Checking over the premises, our diminutive detective uncovers a series of clues that lead him to a truly outlandish theory. With no other leads to follow and the Farks brothers' maid hospitalized, Raven catches a flight. Correction, is caught by a flight to Universal Studios. While artist Tom Sutton has worked in many genres, he is perhaps best known for his horror comics. The guy just loved drawing monsters, and here he gets to deliver his take on 2 of Hollywood's most iconic, in the forms of Bela Lugosi and Morton Barloff. As a reward for their tremendous success, the movie studio has built the 2 horror movie stars their own gothic castle in the heart of Hollywood. After a suitably spooky back and forth between the characters, our hero discovers that Lugosi and Barloff are not the Farks brothers' kidnappers at all, but merely the unlucky victims of a Farks brothers prank. Raven leaves the monsters to whatever they were doing before he showed up and tries to pick up the trail. A chance encounter with Hollywood starlet Maria Astoria and her fruit hat leaves Raven to the home of Bumphrey Hogarth. Watching from the wings, Raven witnesses a bizarre recreation of Casablanca. It turns out the Farks brothers haven't been abducted at all. Instead, they've been hiding out in Hogarth's estate to secretly teach the stone-faced actor how to be funny. It's a weird ending to an off-the-wall tale packed with puns, in-jokes, and what Bill Elder referred to as chicken fat, little gags hidden within the panels to reward the sharp-eyed reader. The next tale, Rosebud, isn't nearly as successful, collapsing under the weight of the historical events that it's framed within. The story is best enjoyed as a venue for Sutton's evocative artwork. Here, the artist's style appears simplified, almost rushed at first, but it's a stylistic choice, used with the utmost of precision. Loose blobs of shape and shadow resolve into recognizable, if not iconic imagery. Everything in the artist's world is hyper-stylized, reinforcing the visual consistency of our title character. The panels are wonderfully evocative and exert a powerful pull on my imagination especially. As a child, locations like the one shown here really resonated with me, leading me to seek out those sort of lonely and abandoned places once I was old enough to leave the house on my own. Heck, in these times of social isolation, it's a great way to get outside, at least briefly. It's a cool little book, but its odd size and spotty distribution didn't do it any favors. Price continued to work as a writer and publisher until his untimely death in 2005. I owe him a personal debt of thanks, as he published one of my all-time favorite books, Weird Heroes Volume 6, featuring Galactic Gumshoe, a story written by Arthur Byron Covert and illustrated by the aforementioned Ralph Reese. Thank you, Mr. Price. I wouldn't be who I am without this book today. Next up, here's a format that should be familiar to our European readers, a tabloid. The Eagle here was a British children's comic periodical first published from 1950 to 1969 and then revived in 1982. It lasted until 1994. This one's from 1986. At the time, the Eagle had absorbed the canceled Tiger comic, and it was running through its inventory of stories. So this book is an interesting mishmash. The action begins with Doomlord already in progress. The Doomlord's son, Enoch, has been kidnapped by the Fire Lords and taken to the Barren Place for ritual sacrifice. Doomlord follows the foul fiends to the tomb of the everlasting fire and stops the sacrifice by claiming the right of the ordeal of the fire beast. Being a sporting sort, the Fire Lords agree, and they drop Doomlord off in a labyrinth chock full of the fire beasties. And then, well, the damn thing is over. All right, I get it. This is how you get readers to come back week after week, but dang it, I wanted to see more of this one. Next up, we get the very 1980s The Computer Warrior, which is drawn on a severe downer. Bobby Patterson and his friend Martin have become trapped in the Nightmare Zone, an electronic realm of unending death and reincarnation inside their pal Smiley's computer. The story picks up with a recently revived Bobby taking out a cyborg hit squad. They've already captured Martin, whose spirit is now broken. Before the boys can react, wicked-looking black star spikes appear, impaling them on small needle-like tines. Yowza! Do you like that, kid? You want to know what happens next? Me too. There's also a weird strip in here called Death Wish, although Charles Bronson is conspicuously absent. The story is pretty unengaging, but it does feature these dudes rocking the Deathman look from the Japanese Batman manga of the 1960s, so that's pretty cool. However, the real action here is the centerfold, where we get two glorious pages of color. It's used to good end on the Eagles' flagship strip, Dan Dare, where we get bug-eyed aliens and a fun spaceship battle. Better yet, we get an additional color page of the strip on the back of the book, which adds to the overall visual appeal of the package. There are some cool ads here as well. We bought our box of Weetabix, so what have we got? Serpent Skull? Not bad, not bad. There's a Krampus and some Nightbreed reject, as well as Warren Zevon's muse, a big old spider, and what appears to be Judge Death. Pretty hardcore for breakfast. There are a few more stories in here, along with curiosities like reader profiles, amateur art, and a birthday wishes column. It's fun to see this stuff as an American reader, as comics in the U.S. were far more regimented and uniform. Tabloids like this are a fun little blast of content that leave you entertained and wanting more. If you find some of these somewhere cheap, pick 'em up. You just might be surprised. Next up, have you ever bought a comic book simply because you wanted to see two superheroes beat the living crap out of one another? It's a promise that many books make but few deliver, but when it comes to all-out, balls-to-the-wall fisticuffs, Now, a safe bet would be to assume that a tussle between these two titans would merely be a setup for some bigger adventure featuring the Big Blue Boy Scout and his Earth-esque counterpart, the Big Red Cheese, but apparently writer Jerry Conway had ideas of his own. Well, one idea anyway, which was essentially to bash two of DC Comics' most popular properties off of each other like your sister-in-law's 4-year-old playing with your valuable action figures. Control your goddamn kid, Karen! Sorry. As you can see, when it comes to old comics, this is a big one. What were alternately called collector's editions or treasuries. An experiment by the comic industry in the 1970s to explore new formats and stand out on a crowded newsstand. The results were mixed. And while many of these oversized books feature some reprints of pre-existing stories, some of these bad boys actually contain supersized originals only available here. Let's get into it. On the surface of Mars, in his castle on the utmost crag of Mount Olympus, Lex Luthor knockoff Carmag has turned evil. That explains the outfit, but why? Well, in Carmag's mad quest for immortality, he may have inadvertently annihilated the entirety of the Martian race. Whoops. Hey, you can't let others hold you back, folks. Now, alone and with nothing better to do than dwell on a boner bigger than the Joker's, he hatches an insane plan. Carmag whips up some bad guys in the form of Black Adam and the Quardian, a Superman doppelganger made of sand. After establishing his top-doggedness, Carmag dispatches his pawns to enact his scheme. What's his brilliant plan, you ask? Magnets! That's two big green magnets, to be specific, one placed on Superman's Earth and the other on Captain Marvel's. Once activated, the magnets will become attracted to one another, drawing the Earths together into a massive explosion, the energy of which Carmag will then harness to bring the rest of his race back from the dead. Yeah, as far as plans go, it's best not to think too deeply into this one. So Superman gets a nice little intro, bringing readers up to speed on his latest changes. Oh sure, he's still flying around stopping crime, but the update comes in the world of alter ego Clark Kent. No longer employed by the Daily Planet, Lois and Clark now work for Morgan Edge's Metropolis TV news station WGBS. In the middle of a broadcast, the studio is suddenly rocked with a series of staggering impacts caused by Captain Marvel! only it's Black Adam posing as Captain Marvel thanks to Carmag's illusion spell. After allowing Superman to get close enough, Adam uses Carmag's Judgment Ray. Enraged by the Ray's effects, Superman heads off to track down the real Captain Marvel, with the recently arrived Supergirl concerned about her cousin's uncharacteristic behavior. Meanwhile, on Earth S, Captain Marvel prevents a bridge from collapsing with the aid of his cousin Mary and a bunch of cars that he just kind of crams into the fissure. This seems like an iffy fix to me, but hey, I don't have the wisdom of Solomon now, do I? The Quardian shows up in disguise, slaps the captain around a bit, and then tags him with the old Judgment Ray, too. Zappo! And with that, the stage is set for action. Captain Marvel traverses from his Earth to ours with Mary in tow. He confronts Superman in Metropolis, and the two go at it hammer and tongs. Unlike the previous encounters, this is the real Superman and Captain Marvel fighting, and they aren't shy about it. The battle rages across the countryside, from Niagara Falls to the Grand Canyon, leaving a wave of mayhem and destruction in their wake. Meanwhile, the girls decide to team up and figure out this whole thing once and for all. They go their separate ways, and they track down Black Adam and the Quardian, who they engage. And while Supergirl has to beat the piss out of Black Adam, the Quardian rolls over immediately, spilling Carmag's plan like so much beach sand. Now hep to the real crisis, the gals head off to dismantle the magnets, while the boys continue to hammer away at one another. But then a strange thing happens. The Judgment Ray's effect begin to wane. It's not enough to stop the fight, but it does get the fellas thinking. However, before the good captain can bring his aforementioned wisdom to bear, Superman lays him out with a sonic haymaker. It's enough to bring the Man of Steel to his senses, but is it too late? No, it's fine. The captain's healing powers kick in, and the boys head off to help their cousins, who more or less have this whole thing wrapped up by now. It's a wild ride, and one very much of its time, uncomplicated by nuance or pretension. This is a comic that knows what it is and delivers it in spades. One might argue that Carmag could be more developed, or that in 72 pages some bigger issues might at least be hinted at, but that's missing the point. This is a comic book about two guys punching each other, and that's fine. You want nuance? Go read Love and Rockets. The book is illustrated by Rich Buckler and Dick Giordano. They do a fine job, but the duo's tendency to emulate the style of Neil Adams can be a bit distracting. It's not that it isn't a great homage, but when you know it's not Adams, some of the panels just seem a little over the top. Your mileage may vary. It appears the artists were given two mandates: Adams homages and cram as many boob and butt shots as possible in the space of 72 pages. Seriously, there's more TNA on display here than the front row of a Van Halen concert in 1984. Not that there's anything wrong with that, mind you. It just feels a tad obvious. Of course, horny young deviants like myself wanted to see the young ladies, but at least we expected a veneer of deniability. Superman vs. SHAZAM is a fun book, one that takes advantage of its oversized format to tell a larger-than-life story. It's a great read if you're a DC Comics fan or you just like action in general. I'm your host, Jason Mink. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all of you who contributed recently. Your support for the network means more than words can say. It's support like yours that makes videos like these possible. High-quality videos like these, where my prop is completely empty. I'd like to thank you for joining me. Next week, we're going to do it again, so I hope to see you next Sunday at breakfast.